This is the S2G podcast, where we share conversations that help us understand how to scale the food, agriculture, oceans, and energy transitions. I'm your host, Tanya Bekritzes. In this episode, Katlin Smith, founder and CEO of Simple Mills, takes us through her journey building a best-selling natural food brand. As a reminder, this content is for informational purposes only. It should not be taken as legal, business, tax, or investment advice, or be used to evaluate any investment or security, and is not directed at any investor or potential investor in any investment vehicle sponsored by S2G. Investing involves risk, including the risk of loss. Specific companies mentioned in this podcast are for educational purposes and should not be construed as an endorsement of any kind. Please note that S2G may maintain investments in some of the companies discussed on this podcast. For more important information, please see s2gventures.com/disclosures. Like many entrepreneurs, Katlin Smith started a company because she found herself searching for something that was not widely available at the time. So she set out to build Simple Mills with a seemingly straightforward goal.
So our goal is that the consumer doesn't have to compromise, that you can get something that works hard for your body and works hard for the planet and tastes freaking amazing.
But figuring out how to meet that need took some trial and error and a lot of determination. As Katlin learned the ins and outs of building a business, there were times when it was pretty touch and go.
It's okay. The next step involves a good bit more money. I sold my car. I used all of my savings. Before it was all said and done, maxed out my credit cards.
In this episode, Katlin and Chuck discuss the necessary but terrifying need to get honest feedback about your product, the importance of hiring the right people early on, how to know when it's time to scale, and Simple Mills' environmental mission that involves working with farmers to transform the supply chain, not just for their company, but for the whole industry. Building and scaling a food business is full of challenges, from product development to fundraising to marketing, and Katlin's remarkably open about her learnings along this journey. So let's jump into it.
So exciting to have you on the call. We've been following what you've been doing at S2G for a long time. So thank you for your time today. Want to just jump in and ask if you could quickly introduce yourself and then talk about the story of Simple Mills and why you started it. I know that's certainly out there, but would love to hear your take.
For sure. Yeah. So Katlin Smith, founder and CEO of Simple Mills. I started this company 12 years ago at this point. Been doing this for over a decade now. And I started Simple Mills back after cleaning up my diet. So I was a management consultant. I was traveling around a lot. I was eating out a lot. And I really wasn't feeling my best. And one of my good friends suggested to me, he said, why don't you try cleaning up your diet? I had this other friend, she cleaned up her diet and it just made a huge difference for her. And one interesting thing probably to know about me is that I am probably a scientist by nature. I double majored in business and biology. And so this whole idea that food could affect all kinds of things was fascinating to me. And so it was really an experiment in my mind of, okay, let's try changing up my diet and see what happens. So I switched to a primarily whole foods based diet and really everything changed. Everything changed. And I was stunned. My health did a 180. And with that, I ended up, maybe angry is the right word, about what we've done with our food system and what we've done to people's diets and all of the ways that is manifesting as you look across our population. And so for me, I had this big question, which is, how do you change what people are eating? And so I went home one day, I brainstormed probably 10 different ways that I can personally impact what people are eating. It was everything from going and getting my master's in public health, which was actually an avenue that I explored for a period of time. But ultimately, I realized that one of the most powerful ways you can impact the future and impact the world is by building a company that does it differently, because you build something that grows sustainably, that doesn't continually need kind of influxes of capital to maximize impact, and you influence other players. to change the way that they're operating too. So really, that was my at least impetus for starting Simple Mills. Today, we are the largest natural baking mix, natural cracker, and natural cookie brand. What we do is we make these products out of these astoundingly nutrient-dense ingredients, and we put them into amazingly delicious forms that people love to eat. So
That's
people know
awesome.
us for our like almond flour crackers. We have these new Pop'ems, which is like our cheddar snackable cracker made out of butternut squash and red bean. We have these sweet thins, which is like a little graham cracker made out of watermelon seed. We just use these super cool ingredients in ways that are really delicious.
That's fantastic. So you decide you want to start a food company. What were some of the first steps? Like, how do you go from this concept, even choosing what segment or category you want to compete in?
It was really, in a lot of ways, the classic entrepreneur journey, which is like you do everything yourself. I think that the first question I wrestled with was, okay, what are we making? We started out in baking mixes as background, but initially it was like, okay, maybe I'll make these meal kits that make it easier for people to eat simple ingredients and whole food ingredients. And one of the first quote unquote meal kits that I was working on developing was a bread mix, which then led me down this path of making muffins and making baking mixes. But it was an entry point. It was a way of getting into the industry, right? It's a little bit tougher to start out making crackers and cookies because the manufacturing is a little bit more complex, right? Versus a baking mix. And so I started with experimenting with recipes in my kitchen, playing with different quantities of ingredients. And kind of the funny thing about us is we were the first ones using almond flour in baking mixes or crackers or cookies. We were the first ones using coconut sugar. And so all of these things I had to discover. I had to think, okay, what am I going to make this out of? And so I went on this exploratory path, like, okay, let's try out this ingredient. Why can't you make a baking mix out of almond flour? I don't know. Let's try it. What are we going to sweeten it with? We don't want to use conventional cane sugar. And it was my mom who actually found coconut sugar on the internet. This is like back before you could find coconut sugar in grocery stores. But I really had to figure out like everything from A to Z. How do I do QuickBooks? How do I create a nutrition facts panel? What regulatory bodies do I need to comply with? And what are the regulations? Where do I manufacture this product? What do I want to name the company? The whole thing.
Yeah, that's so much for sure. So cake mixes are where you started, right? And so how did you think about, we're going to the shelf and looking at what other boxes were and how they were designed and the average serving size and calorie? Like, how did you get to that sort of first set of recipes that you decided, okay, this is what we want to try and market? And did you go to retail right out of the gate, or were you selling online or at farmers markets, or how did you start to test the idea to make sure that there was interest from consumers?
Yeah, in retrospect, I probably could have and should have done a lot more. And my advice to entrepreneurs would not be what I did. I don't know that it's the best example. I think there were a couple of things that were leading indicators for me. And one was, look, like they had started selling almond flour in grocery stores. And every time I would go to the store, I would check on the shelf and it would be practically sold out every time. So I could tell that there was really high sell-through on that item, which is a good indicator that, okay, consumers are pulling this through. They are interested in using almond flour in baking. And I didn't know it at the time, but it actually was the number one best-selling item in Whole Foods grocery. So it was doing quite well.
Yep.
So I was onto something there. But it was really trial and error with the recipes. The other thing that I would say too about that time, and also just about our approach to innovation maybe, is we've been less outward looking than the average consumer products company. So the way that innovation often works in a large consumer products company is you go out and you look at what does the consumer want. You ask them all these questions and you do focus groups and you study the trends. And that's just fundamentally not been what we're about. We were about changing the way that our food is made. And so it was less of a question of, okay, what does the consumer want? And it's been more of a leader strategy, which is what is the great thing that we can give consumers? And how can we make things better for them and add value to their lives? So then when I was thinking about what do I make a baking mix out of, or is this the right recipe? It was more with that lens than it was, okay, what are the other players on the shelf doing.
Yeah.
Now, you also asked about how we started. We did start on Amazon at first and then went into Whole Foods about 8 months later. I was working full time. I was traveling around the country as a management consultant. It took time to really get going. But the interesting thing about starting on Amazon is I had these delusions of what starting on Amazon would be like, which is that, okay, you have all these people who are interested in almond flour. They're searching for it online. So they're going to search Amazon for almond flour, and then we're going to show up and they're going to buy our product. That's not what happened. Like every month we would sell like 2 units on Amazon. And most of the time those were to friends and family who were just trying to be nice and buy our products. But the thing is, Amazon and generally search results show up based off of volume.
Yeah, rich gets richer sort of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like they call it a flywheel. Once you're in the flywheel, it works really well for you. And so what ultimately actually got us going on Amazon, as an example, is later on that year, what would later be known as an influencer, they weren't really called influencers back then, but what would later be known as an influencer wrote about us on her Facebook page. And yes, Facebook, Instagram wasn't really a thing then either. She wrote about us on her Facebook page and sold us out of our Amazon inventory within an hour. And I'm not joking, for some time we were the #1 best-selling muffin mixes on Amazon.
That's fantastic. And so going back to that insight around almond flour being a high mover, because that's one of the things, like with entrepreneurs, I sometimes don't think they do, is look for those insights of where we talk about water running downhill. Like there's gravity that sort of moves some things along. And so how do you play into that gravity instead of playing against that gravity? How did you think about getting to what the first set of SKUs were that were out the door?
Yeah, I think that the big thing that I wanted to make sure of is that the product tasted really good. And so at least my way of doing it was trying the product with friends, particularly friends who weren't necessarily your natural consumer, to make sure that they liked it and would want to eat a ton of it before I went to market. And to be honest, I don't know that I actually hit the point where I felt that I was done with my work there. What ended up happening is we'd been selling a couple of units here and there on Amazon, but I was just curious how you get into retail stores. And so I called up my local Whole Foods store, which was the Whole Foods on Ponce de Leon in Atlanta, and just asked them, how do you get into your stores? And the grocery buyer answered and said, you just come down here and meet with me. Do you want to come down here and meet with me on Wednesday? And the thing was, I was working full time. So no, how about Saturday?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he said, okay.
That's great. Yeah.
And so I went down there, brought him some baked muffins, a kind of package of our mix. And he was just astounded at how good it tasted. And with that, he was like, we sell a lot of almond flour, which I knew but didn't know. And he was like, let's get these on the shelf. And so 4 months later, we started in Whole Foods. And it takes that long to process the paperwork and everything.
Yeah, totally. And that's where, again, like putting yourself out there and doing it, sometimes you're going to get it right, sometimes you're going to get it wrong, but just getting this empirical evidence of what do people want, what sells, and just keeping that sort of constant learning, knowing that some of it's not going to work, but just having to move forward. And
that's so true, by the way. I have to just for a moment sit on this point, because it is such a vulnerable thing when you are building a business to go out and genuinely ask and what people think of your product, what a retailer thinks of your product. And I just remember feeling so nervous about it too, because it's not just oh, do you like this or not? It's almost, it feels like a judgment on the entire thing you're building and the thing that you're spending 80 hours a week on. You're like, is it good? Is it right?
Yeah. And do you feel like you were able to push people to get that real answer from them? Or was there times where you just wanted to be like, yeah, tell me it's great?
I think probably a little bit of both, to be honest. I can feel that feeling viscerally of you want to know, but you don't want to know. But you have to get that feedback. I remember one of the things we would do to get into stores in the early days is like I would send out packages to all these places. Like we did store by store sell-in for probably our first 100 stores that we got into. And one of the chains we were targeting was Natural Grocers by Vitamin Cottage, which is this kind of chain of natural food stores based in the Rockies. And So I would call them up and say, okay, I have this almond flour baking mix. They would say, yeah, send it and I'll try it. And then what I had to do after that was call them 2 weeks later and say, hey, did you receive my package? Did you try it? And I remember just dreading those phone calls because you're like, it felt like a judgment, but you need that information because it's so much worse if you go far down the path and you don't know that it's not working. Like you're just wasting your time, your money, maybe other people's time and money.
Yeah, that's really hard to do. And I think it's so important to be comfortable with discomfort, right? Because not everyone's going to like your product. And then I always think about the crossing the chasm mindset of you got this innovator, early adopter, early majority, late majority, and laggard. And sometimes you're going to be talking to laggards who aren't going to be as interested in your product. And they're like fine with the status quo. And they may not give you the answer you're looking for, but frankly, they're not your innovative customer there. And so you got to know that that's going to happen and then move on and go find that person who is your customer.
So who was that customer that Simple Mills was targeting, and how to best reach them? Katlin shared how the company went through a process of determining how to message their product to customers.
I think that at least initially, I was thinking about certainly a consumer who is already on this journey toward eating more whole food ingredients. That said, I should probably pause here and say, I don't have a background in brand management. Like I'm probably a little bit more on like the operational and execution end of the spectrum. And so the reason why I say that is that it's really important to identify what are your strengths as a leader and as an individual, and making sure that you're building a team around you that has strengths in those other areas. And so one of the great things that has really helped us as a business is early on, I hired the woman who is still our CMO and got her input around, okay, what should we be doing with this brand and how do we best market it? Because that was not my background. And so when you look at our early days messaging and what was on our packages, I'll just paint a picture for you. It was a green and white package. The food photography was terrible. I shot the food photography in my bedroom with my phone. I also didn't know that you actually have to go out to the printers of packages and make sure to match the colors. That's a whole step in the process. And so because I didn't do that, the food photography was also coming off kind of a greenish hue. Really delicious looking, I'm telling you. And then I had this, like all these claims on the front of the package of gluten-free, dairy-free, paleo-friendly, soy-free. And our products are all of those things. And also today, we do not put those on front of pack because all of those things that I just talked about, what they tell you is that our product is not going to taste good. And that's not the case. And so one of the things that we've done with thinking about how we message the brand is just taste has to be number one when you're dealing with a food product. A very small portion of the population will eat better if it doesn't taste good. But you're not going to affect the vast majority of people if you're just speaking to a really small group and maybe saying that our product is not going to taste good. So we've really changed that messaging.
Yeah, so important because I do think there's people who want to change the world. They believe that people will voluntarily eat stuff that just isn't good or satisfying or satiating. And that's such an important piece of this that it's never going to scale. And taste matters, right? One of my other favorite entrepreneurs, Seth Goldman's, always leads with product. And it's like he shows up to every meeting with his products in hand because I think it does two things. One is it gets the product in your buyer's mouth and they can taste it and experience it themselves. But two is it also keeps you honest. Because if you're putting stuff that doesn't taste good in front of them, you're going to get that real-time live feedback right then and there. And so you're in bake mixes. How do you think about taking that next step of the company, and when was it the right time to do that? How much revenue comfort did you have that, okay, this is working? What were some of the signs of thinking about adding new categories or new SKUs?
Yeah, I think there were a few indicators over time that really told me I was onto something. One of them was being the best-selling muffin mixes on Amazon. That was like, okay, we do have something substantive going here. There were cases where we had retailers reach out to us to ask us to stock our product. And I give Wegmans major kudos for this. But Wegmans reached out to us and said, can we meet you at Expo West, which is the largest natural products expo out there, which is unheard of that buyers reach out to you. So that was another one. And kind of further on down the path in the food industry, you can buy the syndicated retail sales data for your products. You can find out how well your product is selling relative to other products on the shelf. And when I did that, I realized we had the top velocity baking mixes in the space, which was, I think for a long time, I just didn't even believe the data. I was like, something's wrong with the data. That can't be true.
So Katlin knew she was onto something and that it was time to take the business to the next level. But figuring out exactly what that next step is and how to fund it turned out to be a pretty uncertain process.
Earlier on, once we became the best-selling muffin mixes, I was like, okay, so I need to put a lot more money into this. Not so much like I need to invest more to invest. It's okay, the next step involves a good bit more money. And with that, like I sold my car. I used all of my savings. Before it was all said and done, maxed out my credit cards. And then you start encountering working capital issues, which for an undergrad business major, I really didn't have enough appreciation for cash cycles, but it's okay where the more you sell, the more money you need because you're not getting paid back for at least a couple months, if not a few months. And so it was really hand to mouth when it came to production. It was like, I can only afford to make a production run that's this size because I only have this amount of money in my bank account. And then we'd run out of that product like the next day. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we need to do another production run. And so I realized I needed to raise money, which was its own journey.
A lot of kudos to you in that you did, first of all, get to a product people wanted to have, had these sales channels set up, had production capability, and all of that. Because one of the things we do see is a lot of entrepreneurs show up without asking to raise some big amount of capital. They're going to hire 5 or 6 people that are then going to go out and build this great company with $5 or $8 million from some VC, right, who's going to sponsor them or whatever. And so you didn't go in that direction. Did you know there was like this whole venture capital work? Because there wasn't a ton of food investors, especially at that stage when you were launching or when you were growing. But did you avoid that channel on purpose, or how did you think about fundraising? What was your mindset then?
When I first realized that we needed more than the money I had in my bank account, I built a model. It's like, okay, I need $200,000, which anybody who has spent any time in building a consumer products brand is probably, oh my gosh, that is so far under what you need to build a consumer brand. But I didn't really appreciate that at the time. And so I went to a family friend who was going to fund the company. And interestingly, the company was doing really well and we were about to close on that. And he came back and said, I want to renegotiate the deal. And yeah. And so I remember just feeling like my back's against the wall. I don't have any money. Whatever the terms he says, I have to do. And my parents were just so angry. And they ended up mortgaging their house and giving me $200,000. And ironically, $200,000 was the amount of money I needed to bridge me through to raising the amount of money I needed, which our first round, we raised about $2 million. And that was about 4 months later after that happened. We haven't mentioned this, but I had gone into business school a little earlier that year. And so I was at the University of Chicago's MBA program, and I was really just taking any class that would let me work on the business. And so I was taking this class on fundraising, ironically, and I came into the class and they're like, so you're going to fundraise? And I'm like, no, I don't need to fundraise. But by, of course, like month 2 or 3 into the class, I'm like, oh, actually, I do need to fundraise, it turns out. And there are all these places as an entrepreneur that you look back and you're like, it takes both hard work and luck, but man, I was lucky to be sitting in that place at that time. And so they were teaching me how to build investment presentations. They were introducing me to potential investors. And the thing was, even with that, it was super hard to get funded. So I would meet with, I'm not joking, probably 7 or 8 different potential investors every day. And each one would say, no, this one's not right for me, but it might be right for this one. I would, of course, say, absolutely, introduce me. I'll meet that next person.
It sounds exhausting, but in the end, it was that sheer volume of people that Katlin spoke with that helped Simple Mills secure their lead investor.
The way that we ended up meeting our lead investor is he walked into a Whole Foods store in Charlotte, North Carolina to look at our product on the shelf. Goes down to the baking aisle, looks at the item on the shelf. He turns to the woman next to him and asks her what she thinks of the brand. And it turns out I'm also talking to her about investing in Simple Mills. And so she says, I'm thinking about investing in the company. And so that kind of lit a fire of urgency under him. And so
Oh,
he
wow.
called me up, was like, okay, I want exclusive rights to take a look at this deal for the next week. And so that's how I ended up getting funded. But it's an angel investor group. And to your point, it wasn't a hugely developed investment space at that point. But also, I think it was really hard to get funded as a first-time entrepreneur with something that's still
Mhm.
pretty unproven. So even when you do meet with folks who know the space better, there's just a lot of risk in any one of these companies at that stage.
Yeah, agree. And I think the margin for error. So with a lot of tech companies, right, there's this sort of theoretical infinite upside opportunity that you can get. Whereas in food, how the upside looks is a little bit different, right? And so that's where I think trying to find those investors who understand that and are aware of the dynamics of your specific industry can be really hard, because a lot of the venture community over the last 20 years, frankly, has been focused on the tech or the SaaS type of model, the consumer internet type of models. Raising capital against that other model is just different. It's showing up to a basketball game with football cleats on sometimes. Like, it's just, you're expecting a different type of environment to be in, and returns expectations and all that stuff. And given that you were doing this hand to mouth for so long, you had a great sense for what the realities of the business were from a financial standpoint through time, right? Maybe not out of the gate, but through time. And it sounds like a lot of the hiring and cost side of things, you were very cautious about, because you just, out of necessity, you can't hire, 7 or 8 people out of the gate to come in and help. You had to wear, a lot of these hats within an organization. And to me, I'm an experiential learner. And so when I needed to know QuickBooks, like, I just went in and opened it up and started entering stuff in. And I'm sure I did most of it wrong the first time, but it helped me understand what was needed and how to build on that. So as I'm looking at, when do I really need to bring someone on and when can I afford it? So it sounds like there's a lot of that type of decision making that you had to do early on.
Yeah. And I am an experiential learner. And there is such value to that. To even today, for me to understand, I know enough to be dangerous, but certainly probably like you did a number of things wrong in QuickBooks, but at least I know a little bit of how different things work across our full organization.
I think that's such a valuable thing for CEOs, because yes, I think understanding what you do best is important, but also knowing what those other roles do is really important, right? Because that's where I was talking to someone who was leading some people, and they're like, if you're in finance and you're going up through the finance organization, your boss has done your job before. But when you're the CEO, when you have that finance person, if you've never done that job before, it's hard to then be able to give them the insights and instructions they need to be able to be successful.
Like that's one of the big decisions that you make as a CEO as the organization grows, is who you put in what roles, how the organization is set up. And in my opinion, that is a real driver of success or failure of organizations as they scale. And you have to have something that's informing your gut there around how a particular function's operating.
Hiring, and especially hiring those first employees, can determine the success of a company. Katlin had a clever approach to making sure she hired the right people early on.
The really big first hire that we made was our head of marketing. And maybe this is another good kind of a skill for entrepreneurs to develop, but one, identifying what you want in your talent. So almost developing a thesis around what you want someone's background to look like coming into a role, and then being able to identify that talent when it walks through the door. And that's, like many things as a leader, a developed skill. That's oftentimes not something that you have on day one. Especially in the early days, my failure rate on hiring was much higher. In the case of the CMO role, I developed this thesis around, okay, I think I want someone who has a little bit of consulting background or like some sort of like business background. And then after that, I think she got her MBA. And I think she worked for a large CPG for a period of time. So she got some good classical brand management experience. And then ideally, she also has some background in nutrition. So she's passionate about what we're doing as a brand. And that was the search criteria that I went through LinkedIn with. And I used the LinkedIn recruiter function. I basically put in those criteria. I identified there were, I think, 10 people in Chicago that fit that criteria based on LinkedIn. I reached out to all 10 of them. 4 of them responded, and I met her and thought, she's exactly what we need.
Very nice. And that sounds like a fairly efficient process that you were able to develop on your own and manage. So,
yeah, I have personally hired all of the top people in our organization, done the LinkedIn outreach, found them.
yeah, that's great. It's so important, I think, because that's those are the people who are going to carry the baton for the company and, move it forward. So you started off with, you have to eat better because you want to feel better. That was the main insight that you built on. Since then, you've added a lot of other aspects to your mission. And how do you think about your mission today as a company?
So our mission is to revolutionize the way that food is made to positively impact people's health and the planet's health. And to your point, we started out focusing on the people, and we added the planetary component formally added it in 2020. My passion for that area really started in 2019. And it was through a series of meetings and even coincidences. Like I just have to appreciate the randomness of the universe sometimes, and it taking you certain ways. And I kind of pay attention to those signs and think, okay, maybe I should keep digging here. And so there are a number of conversations that led me down this path of agriculture and the impacts that agriculture has on our planet and on people's health. And one of the places that led me was to taking a permaculture design course. So I did this actually at Jordan Rubin's farm in Missouri. He is the founder of Garden of Life, and he was building this massive permaculture farm in Missouri and hosting courses there. And so I went there for a 10-day course. It's me and probably 20 other people. I am the only person who does not own land or regularly work with soil and on a farm. And it was just tremendously enlightening for me to realize that our soil health drives so much. And I just saw so many overlaps and parallels between what we've done with people's health and how we've done the same thing with the planet. To give you a couple tactile examples, when we have a more diverse diet, so when we eat more than 30 different plants a week, we have a much healthier microbiome. Having a healthy microbiome is just absolutely fundamental for your health. Like just bare bones, like one of the best things you can do for yourself. And at the same time, land that has much more diversity on it also it thrives. It has so much more microbial diversity, which is also really fundamentally important for soil health. You have 1,000 beneficial species for every one pest, which means that you're not thinking about pesticides. When you have healthier soil, you're better able to store water on the land. You're seeing drought resistance. You are seeing much better sequestration of nitrogen and carbon. If you think about like healthy soil is black. Why is it black? It's because it has carbon in it. It's pulled carbon out of the air. What is a plant? A plant is sequestered carbon and nitrogen. And so I just saw all of these places where, man, like you can't think about people's health in a vacuum. These two things are just so interlinked. And also I'm a big believer in these kind of places where you can have multiple benefits and accomplish multiple things. And so it's just a really eloquent solution. Okay, let's lean more into this area. And I left that with such a tremendous sense of responsibility as a food industry CEO to be making a positive impact with the way our food is grown.
And so you push this to actually start to now develop relationships directly with farmers and really think about the exact locations that your ingredients came from, and are they actually living up to certain standards? Were these standards you helped develop with the farmers, or were these farmers already doing it out there? How did you engage with some of these farmers?
Yeah. So what we did in 2020, so coming out of this, okay, so I want to change also how our food is grown. How do I do that? And so we first of all made the commitment that 100% new innovation would advance regenerative agriculture. And there's a few different ways that we think about that. One is a part of our heritage, which is that we are interested in increasing dietary diversity. So from our very beginnings as a company, we have been trying to navigate folks away from the top 3 crops. So over half of calories worldwide are in 3 crops. And we don't use those at Simple Mills, where our goal is to diversify what people are eating. So part of that's in food design. The second piece, though, and this is what I've been really excited about that we've been working on over the past 4 years, is our goal is to advance and accelerate the transition to regenerative agriculture. And we partner with growers and we partner with organizations across the world to accelerate the transition to regenerative agriculture on our top 5 crops as a brand. And so we have key programming in almonds, in sunflower seeds, in coconut sugar and cocoa. And what we do with those farmers is, one, we are helping to de-risk their transitions to regenerative agriculture with financial incentives. We are also supporting them in the educational journey. And we are working to amplify their learnings across the industry and to other farmers. And so we also fund education events. So I'll give an example of this is working with our almond project. So with our longtime almond farmer partners, we're experimenting with using compost, with putting animals on the land, with using cover crops, with minimizing the number of synthetic inputs. And it's a couple years in now, and we're just seeing really wonderful success. To give you a visual of what this might look like, we had a lot of rain in California last year. I went down to the Central Valley where a lot of almonds are grown, and it was just waterlogged. And this is, by the way, a space that you hear about a lot of times. They're using so much water in almonds, and you go down there and there's just all this water, and it's running off of all of the land. We want the water to be absorbed in the land so that the trees are able to make use of it so that you don't have to irrigate later in the season. And then you come upon this plot of land where we're doing this experimentation, and it is like an oasis. Like all of the water is being absorbed into the land. There's sheep grazing. It's a lot of almond farms they're barren floors. So it's just like a thick layer of crust on the ground instead of having greenery on the ground. This instead has cover crops across the entire orchard. And then you talk to the farmers about it and they're like, man, we are seeing such success with this. We are proactively expanding the acreage on it because it is working for them financially.
But it doesn't stop there. Simple Mills actually uses these learnings to design programs aimed at helping other farmers outside of their direct ecosystem adopt beneficial practices.
So we actually funded this year a soil health academy where we're sharing out these learnings to 50 different farmers, representing actually 50,000 acres of almonds.
Wow.
And so what that does is it helps change what is available 5 years from now, 10 years from now, the practices that are being used by a full industry versus just buying from one farmer who's doing it well, which is an awesome thing to do, by the way. I should say, like, we do that as well. But it's, in my mind, my goal is I want to see the fastest possible large-scale change. And the best way to do that is to ensure that farmers in specific areas working with specific crops are learning from each other so that they're able to navigate around the obstacles that naturally come up.
So last question, where do you see Simple Mills going? What's your long-term vision at this point?
So our ambition is to make natural mainstream. It is to make these movements around regenerative agriculture, these movements toward eating these whole food ingredients, something that broad scale America is doing. And one of the largest reasons why that hasn't happened in the past is that those products don't taste good, or you necessarily have to compromise one thing for another. So our goal is that the consumer doesn't have to compromise. That you can get something that works hard for your body and works hard for the planet and tastes freaking amazing. And with that, our vision is that, okay, the center aisles of the grocery store change, that you open up consumers' pantries and they're like, oh my gosh, this is my favorite cookie, this is my favorite cracker. But it's not, oh, this is the thing that I'm eating on my best behavior, or I have to compromise to get something that works hard for me. It's like, we can have all of these things and enjoy them as well. So That's where we want to go.
Good. Thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you for tuning in to the S2G podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, or share it with a friend. For more information or to connect with us, check out s2gventures.com.